Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, because there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, what can we say that we really know about Florida Senator Marxist Rube EIEIO? I remember being in law school when he first came to national attention. My law school is located in Naples, Florida, so I remember this sort of wave of energy which overcame the people. They spoke of this young former Speaker of the Florida House who had a vision for the country with such reverence. Yet, when he delivered the commencement address at my graduation a year later, I was thoroughly unimpressed. He was said to be the darling of the Tea Party movement at one time. Some pundits were scrambling to claim that he was the new Latino face of the party. You know, folks, that's a sort of disturbing trend in the salivating mainstream media. They always use remarks like first minority or first Cuban American or what have you when describing politicians of that sort. Why is this necessary? I don't believe for an instant that it affects their judgment. But back then, Rubio was the rising face of the party. Yet he squandered that now by going along with Chuck Schumer, helping to write the Gang of Eight fiasco. I remember thinking that this switch of position wouldn't sit well with those who were so excited to get him elected in the first place. In 2013, Marco really messed things up. It forced him to run away from the bill he helped write, and now he's even lying about that. Why do stuff like that? He's really not what I would consider presidential material. It's like he doesn't have any personal conviction or any convictions whatsoever. That's one of the worst charges you can face as a politician. Remember, folks, it killed the candidacy of John Kerry back in the election of 2004. Rubio's one saving grace is that, at least, he doesn't flip as much as Trump, but that's not saying much. And now there's an article by Kevin Silverstein from The Observer, which threatens to blow Rubio's career out of the water. It covers some really juicy details about Marco's past life as a state-level politician. The article covers the usual fare one might expect from the caricature of a stereotypical corrupt politician. What's worse, at least for Marco, is that it devastates his claim of being a consistent conservative. Folks, this stuff is really pretty bad. I mean, this Silverstein piece is really, really damaging. It starts off by pointing out Marco's drug cartel-affiliated family members, giving him small jobs to mow their yards and walk their dogs as they peddled poison on the streets. Marco conveniently leaves out these details from his autobiography. Per se, this stuff means nothing, other than the fact that his family isn't squeaky clean, as the Rubester likes to claim. Rubio ought to come out and address this before it grows legs and starts kicking his campaign to shreds. The shady beginnings of his political career still have my head spinning. He's made several real estate deals which would put normal people in prison. I mean, folks, this is criminal-level stuff we're talking about here. He double-dipped as a lobbyist while working in the Florida House. You have to remember, though, that Florida law allowed this so long as you called yourself a consultant and connected yourself with a consultant firm or a law firm. That's exactly what Marco did, and he managed to double his salary in the 2-year period that he first started doing this. So, either way, it's seedy. Like one of those 1-900 numbers for sex chats that used to be so popular. It's just filth, and there's no other way to describe what it is that Marco was doing. But folks, it gets worse. You know, of course, I don't foresee Rubio addressing this issue at all. It would only invite more inconvenient questions. Folks, one thing is for sure. If he somehow managed to get the GOP nomination, dollars to donuts, the Dems would have a field day with good old Rube E-I-E-I-O. And that weakens his chances of winning. Because if you stop and think about it, the mainstream media, those graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, would stop nothing to fire every arrow in their quiver at the young Florida senator. There is no way around that. They love to eviscerate the corruption on the right because of the moral stance that the right takes. And people like Marxist Rubio just tarnish that image. And it makes it seem as though all of those who adhere to right-wing principles and to a desire to preserve the Constitution fall into this camp. Yet Marco Rubio is not entirely for the Constitution. We've demonstrated this time and again on past episodes of The Wright Flyer, and I'll get into that a bit more as we go along. So, Rubio's real estate dealings are the most shocking part of the article. Well, arguably. It all ties into this grand conspiracy that Marco is doing his best to keep hidden. Back in 2003, the Rubester bought a house in Miami for $175,000. 2 years later, in 2005, he wanted to sell the place, but couldn't find a buyer. Now, this is where it starts to get seedy, folks. An old friend of his, Mark Cerceda, a chiropractor with a rap sheet, had his mother purchase the house for $380,000. Stop and think about that for a moment. That's a net profit of $205,000 for the Rubester. But he's consistent in his values, and he's not like Ted Cruz, or so he claims, whom he throws aspersions at. Of course, the major distinguishing characteristic between the charges that are being levied against Rubio and those of Cruz is the ones against Rubio are true, and the ones against Cruz are bold-faced lies. Anyway, this whole matter has the sort of tinge to it one would expect from some dark-themed film noir piece. Rubio flipped on a key insurance bill that would help Cerceda. This after he had been touted as the lone holdout for the bill by the local press. If this is what Marco considers consistently conservative, he can have it all to himself. I want no part of it. Who would have guessed that Marco was the sort of soul who loved to wallow in corruption and seedy dealings? What makes matters worse, in this case, is that insurance fraud claims went up exponentially after he allowed it to be passed. You see, this insurance bill that he finally flipped on would require all Florida-based motorists to secure $10,000 in coverage for personal injury coverage. And of course, for his chiropractor friend, Mr. Mark Cerceda, or however it's pronounced, that was a hefty chunk of his practice. And so Marco was able to flip his house for a hefty profit, and that's just a little cute political earmark, the sort of corruption that people loathe and despise about politics and politicians. But it has to be known that all of this special interest stuff that he pulled with his first house went into Cerceda's pockets. And that was a truly cushy deal that he made with the Rubester. If there's one thing Marco seems to be consistent with, it's shady dealings. Like I said, folks, this is some really damning stuff. You know, they've always said that politics is a dirty game, but this takes it to a new level. The Rubster's second real estate deal also raises some eyebrows. The Miami area residence, which is still his home to this day, is a house that he bought in December of 2005 for 495 grand. A mere 37 days later, he took out a 135 grand home equity loan, which he initially failed to disclose on his financial disclosure forms. You know, the very thing that he attacks Ted Cruz for. This after the house had been reassessed for more than 50% of its market value. Yet, he still had the gall to attack Cruz for making a mistake in failing to report a piece of collateral, which was his own property, on his election loan paperwork. This is hypocrisy at its very worst. And Marco's buddies at the Fox News channel haven't even mentioned this stuff once. Yet there's more, and isn't there always? Apparently, Rubio bought this house from a shell company called Sanval Boats LLC. We don't know who owns that entity, nor what it does. You would think it was boats, but it appears they don't own any. Then there's the questionable equity loan financing. U.S. Century Bank appraised the property at 50% above market value to help the Rubster out. This all looks like political grandstanding and aggrandizement at its absolute worst. It is some shady excrement, folks. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. Things get worse for Rubio, however. We all know that on the campaign trail he continues to paint himself as an upstanding citizen who operates out of a love for this country. He really fancies the title of unifier of the party. Folks, I don't think you could get any more cynical than that. It's this sort of behavior that turns people off from the political process in this country. And Marxist Rube EIEIO continues to double down on his shady dealings, as if that will somehow make him popular with the American people. Well, I just don't see it. I don't see how he is going to be able to bridge the gap with true conservatives who have seen a lot of his dealings as a type of backwater deal and stabbing the conservatives in the back. Remember that when he first ran for office, he promised the Tea Party constituency who ushered him into the marbled halls of the Senate that he would not support amnesty. He was carte blanche on that. He was quite staunch on that stance. And of course, we all know how history turned out with respect to that. So looking back at Marco's past, we start to see this undeniable pattern developing with respect to the way he did things. Apparently, he had some rather shady dealings with his PACs, you know, those political action committees back in Florida. The treasurer of his multiple state-level PAC groups was involved with a bank from Ecuador which has connections to a money laundering scheme. You know, I think it's funny when he came out and said that Cruz was owned by the banks, but apparently he's got some weird connections with this as well. And real connections where Cruz doesn't have this sort of corrupt tie to a foreign bank. You know, folks, this has all the hallmarks of corruption written all over it. Worse still is the fact that this same treasurer, Mr. Joaquin Urquiola, had connections with corrupt attorney Alexander Heckler. And no, folks, that's not somebody who's just going in and shouting down Rube EIEIO, but perhaps his deeds here will. Just so you know, Heckler was a chief hill raiser. If that term sounds familiar to you folks, it really should. That's right. He raised money for Hillary Clinton's Senate campaigns. The top donors to her campaigns were known as the Hill Raisers. a play off the word of hellraisers. But that's exactly the sort of corruption that Marco surrounds himself with. Does that sound like someone a consistent conservative would hire for helping manage his campaign financing? The web keeps getting thicker, folks, and Marco's image keeps getting tarnished. But wait, there's more still. His wife is connected with these PACs as well. She was the vice president of one group called Floridians for Real Family Values Incorporated. The group was rather short lived, as the state dissolved the corporation for failing to file an annual report. Worse yet, Mr. Heckler failed to disclose to election authorities that Urquiola was also the treasurer of this group. Adding fuel to the fire is the fact that these three organizations all shared the same tax ID number, and at least $150,000 mysteriously vanished into thin air. Now, how can that be? Doesn't this sound a bit like Barack Hussein Obama using a fake Social Security number, or a real one, but that belonged to a state in which he never dwelled? This is the type of seedy thing that really harms the credibility of a candidate. Yet the cheerleaders at the Fox News network haven't touched this with a 10-foot pole. If any of us had set up companies in the fashion that Rubio did, we'd all be in jail. It appears that Marco is running these operations as a personal money laundering organization. And let's not forget, there is also the alleged mistake of charging a trip to a family reunion to his campaign credit card. Of course, Marco said it was by mistake. But when considered with these other shady deals, it should make inquiring minds rather suspicious. It seems corrupt. There's no other way to describe it, folks. And Marco has a pattern and a penchant for this this type of corruption. It seems to follow him around wherever he goes. And is that really what we want to unleash upon the White House after we've already dealt with the rampant corruption of this Barack Hussein Obama regime? It is strangling the lifeblood out of this country, and it shows that politicians are just a bunch of scoundrels and crooks, or at least the politicians who are of the cloth of Rubio. But Rubio managed to cut out a nice niche for himself through his political connections. He got cushy land deals and can't explain where huge piles of cash vanished to. At least two of his PACs were dissolved for failing to file an annual report, which is required by Florida law. And indeed, that's a usual requirement of any type of business organization code of any state. But anyway, the dissolution of these companies did not occur before they received and transferred some rather handsome profits. This seems more like an organized crime syndicate than a political action committee. Yet, Fox News remains tight-lipped. They realize that loose lips sink ships, and if their darling Marxist Rube EIEIO goes down, then they look desperate. And how can we forget that the daughter of one of the chief producers, particularly with respect to the presidential candidate debates, is a truly entrenched member of the Rubio camp, one of his lead staff members? Taken in the totality of the circumstances, one would not be wrong in thinking that perhaps there's corruption with respect to Fox. We already know that pollster Frank Luntz, the guy who always goes up there and does the interaction with the audiences after the debates and during the election cycle, he admits to being paid a handsome profit. And what's humorous about this is he also points to the Breitbart news organization, who he claims are up the posterior of Donald J. Trump. Now, what's interesting also about this is that shortly before his death, Andrew Breitbart warned that Donald J. Trump is a very dangerous man and not to be trusted. I think he would be rolling over in his grave if he knew just exactly what his company, the company that bears his name, is doing to this day with respect to Donald J. Trump's campaign. It's all laughable, and it's all interconnected and interrelated. And we, the American people, are the ones who are caught up in this Ponzi scheme of lies and deceit. Folks, we have all grown to expect politicians to be a slimy bunch. Scandals have become the norm. Just look at all of the scandals that follow the Obama regime like a spoiled puppy. People are fed up with this sort of nonsense. Despite this, the so-called culture of corruption is in full swing. You guys remember when, back in 2006, Nancy Pelosi gloated in front of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and proclaimed that the culture of corruption was over? Yeah, what a joke. Here we are 10 years later, and Washington is just as corrupt, if not more so, than ever. But that's the way it goes. The culture of corruption is in full swing. It's like they have a reputation to live up to. Washington, D.C. is the government's version of Las Vegas. Of course, being of the government, secrets don't remain secret. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Nah. What's done in D.C. stays on your TV screens. They live the high life off of another's dime. You see, they are panhandlers of the worst sort, because they're not really panhandlers. They are all-out robbers. They hold a proverbial gun to your head through the taxation process and then live high off the hog of your hard-earned money. That is the case that we always see with respect to the political elitists who live in their little hovel on Capitol Hill. Except that hovel is a great mansion filled with marble designed palaces, all reminiscent of the days and opulence of Rome. Well, like I said, it's like they have a reputation to live up to. Yet Marco's hypocrisy is worse, because he claims that Cruz is a consistent liar. It's cute that a man who has so many shady deals and rather dubious companies could levy such a tax. And the people that he hangs around with are not exactly what I would consider the sort you'd like to take home to meet your parents. Marco said Cruz has the unfortunate habit of not telling the truth. Poor Marco was actually projecting here. If he wants to see a real liar, all he needs to do is look in the mirror. He has obfuscated the truth from day one. He has done everything in his power to hide his own twisted machinations and his own departures from reality, and it has been completely detrimental to the party as a whole, but in particular to his campaign. I think that's why Marco can't do any better than he's done in any of the primaries or caucuses that have been held thus far. Granted, only two have, but we are fast approaching the Palmetto State of South Carolina's decision, and Marco is not faring too well in the polls. You see, folks, you shouldn't be deceived by a little liar like Marxist Rube EIEIO. Cruz doesn't have anywhere near the sort of baggage that Rubio does. Rubio's PAC failed to disclose a man with a criminal record as being its treasurer. What's more, Rubio failed to mention his own equity loan on the original paperwork. That compares to Cruz's one and only omission of an election document, which was promptly addressed and amended. Rubio's glass house, or is that glass houses, is starting to show stress fractures. The Rubester had so many shady deals, it's like he owned an entire shade tree orchard. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, folks. It's out there for us all to see. Yet, Fox News keeps protecting their chosen one. It's almost like we're living in the Twilight Zone. Now, what does this mean for the election cycle? If there's one thing we can say about the 2016 election cycle, it's that it is far from being traditional. Donald J. Trump has been an anathema from the start. With each outlandish statement, his credibility drops. Yet, I didn't think it was possible for it to drop any more than it already has. Still, true to their faith in their Messiah, the Trumpster divers continue to follow him as if he is the paragon of value and virtue, and as though he's a conservative, even though he waffles and flip-flops worse than John Kerry windsurfing on a gusty day. Are people tired enough of the corruption to throw their weight behind a proven constitutionalist? Cruz has shown great resilience in the face of withering attacks by his opponents. Nevertheless, the Donald is a master manipulator of the media. Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media has given him so much free press time. Why? Because they sense blood in the water. They think they can tear him apart when it comes to the general election. And let's face it, folks, a huge swath of the conservative base of the gutless opposition party would not support Trump. They couldn't bring themselves to support a man who shares nothing in common with their deeply held beliefs. This is the stark reality that we won't be able to escape. It's there, plain as day, for everyone to see. Yet, you won't hear that from the mainstream media. And you won't hear it from Fox. Now, granted, Fox doesn't like Trump, but I have a feeling that Fox prefers Trump over Cruz because Cruz is a true, staunch constitutionalist who is doing everything in his power to save this country. Now, he can't save it alone. That ultimately falls into our hands. He can merely set the country back onto the right track, which I think is exactly what he would try to do. He's that rare sort of candidate, like a Calvin Coolidge for the 21st century, that is willing to take the steps that are necessary to return the country to strict adherence of those noble principles contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. That's not an easy position to take in a corrupt DC that we see on Capitol Hill today. Politicians of all stripes have become corrupt, and the people simply do not trust them. They do not. But with respect to the Donald being a master manipulator of media, as I said on one of our recent blog posts, Donald J. Trump is like the Pied Piper for disillusioned conservatives. Sarah Palin personifies this odd development. You would think that Sarah wouldn't support someone who had such a dubious record, particularly with issues that were once completely definitive for her. She used to speak a good game. She used to be an excellent speech giver. But now she seems to have adopted the speech pattern of the Donald, dropping out and spewing out all of these incoherent sentence fragments that are not even loosely connected, and then points at the cameras and said, "Media heads are spinning." No, I'll tell you whose heads are a-spinning there, Sarah. It's the American people, the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this great representative republic of ours. Their heads are spinning, wondering how you could have ever sold out your principles to such a degree as you have here. There is no question that you are not standing up for the same things that you proclaimed back when you were a darling of the Tea Party movement. Perhaps we could say that the Tea Party is dead, but I am not willing to completely write them off just yet. The United States of America is still the greatest nation that this world has ever seen. The reason I can proclaim this is because of our great Constitution. There is a partnership that must be held between the ultimate wielders of sovereignty and the federal government. Yet that partnership has been abused. The contract with America has been breached, and we, the American people, are the only ones who can then go back and set the record straight. We are the ones that must wrest our country back from these corrupt politicians. You know, it's interesting. On my Facebook page just the other night, there was a progressive who came out and said, well, just who are you saying that you're going to take the country back from? A black man? No. It has nothing to do with the race of the current president. And it has everything to do with the corrupt lobbyists and elitists that have taken control of this country. That is what we are speaking out against. That is what we are claiming to take our country back from. That is absolutely the message that must resonate in the hearts and minds of every decent, hardworking, red-blooded American citizen. Do not think that these people will not go out of their way to destroy everything that you have built, to deprive you of your fundamental and unalienable rights. You know, that's why the Founding Fathers ratified the Constitution in the first place. And it's why they included the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. It was all done to ensure the sort of corruption that we see running rampant in Washington, D.C. would never occur. Unfortunately, those who wield the reins of political powers, those political powers that be, are doing everything in their power to divorce the operations of government from the strict scope of application for the government as outlined, defined, and mandated by the four corners of our shared Constitution. So, what we see is that Sarah Palin personifies the odd development with respect to Donald J. Trump. But as to my rhetorical question, as to are the people tired enough of the corruption to throw their weight behind a proven constitutionalist, only the actual primary votes themselves will tell. The polls are all over the place. I never really put much credence into polls. How can I? They aren't exactly accurate. Think back to the polls of the 2004 election. They predicted that Kerry would win in a landslide, but that never happened. And aren't we lucky? I hope that the popular sovereigns are ready to choose a true conservative. Modern politics has been devoid of values for quite some time now. I have to say that people on both sides of the aisle are looking for someone who tells it as they see it. That explains why Bernard Sanders, or Face Boing Me Sanders, has taken the left by storm. He's truthful about one thing only, however, and that's being a socialist. Think about just how shocking that is, folks, that we actually have an avowed, a self-proclaimed socialist vying for the highest office in the land, and he's going neck and neck with the princes of the left. Now, all throughout this summer, the Democrats have struggled with Tingle's Christy Matthews question as to how do you differentiate or distinguish a Democrat from a socialist. He was hoping that he could get some points there. However, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and then later Madam Clinton herself proved simply incapable of providing or pointing to a singular distinction. Reason being, there is no distinction between a modern-day Democrat and a Fabian socialist, or indeed a socialist of any stripe. Now, Bernie tries to parse that down and say that it's all about democratic socialism, that that's a more benign, friendly, rainbow fart-smelling, lovey-dovey type of socialism, because it goes through the democratic process. But the fact of the matter is, socialism is socialism is socialism. It all leads to the same type of depressive system that exists, a top-down bureaucracy that deprives the people of their individual human dignity. Of course, that goes against the natural law tenets that underpin this entire representative Republican system of government that we have here in the United States. But you know what? Lord knows we need a man of principles in the White House. But that sure as hell won't be Bernie Sanders. He's honest about his beliefs, yet none of those beliefs are what I would associate with morality or with morals. It's funny. I received a questionnaire from the gutless opposition party, which asked whether they should still focus on social issues. Are they daft? Don't answer that question, folks. It was purely rhetorical in nature. We all know the answer to this, and that answer is yes. Do they not realize that this election is a referendum on our identity as a nation? Now, this question is slightly more serious. I think we all know the answer again. Yet, the Republican leadership is being purposefully obtuse. There's no question that they look down upon the base of the party. And that has been their number one mistake for generations. Their foolishness gave rise to the freak show of Donald J. Trump. Somebody needs to slap some sense into the GOP PR department. They are starting to look like a sad joke. I mean, this gives credence to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Well, that is, unless you're buying into the fiction that Marxist Rubio is a straight-laced, all-American good guy. Then perhaps fiction is stranger than truth. But the asinine question in this pamphlet, indeed all of the asinine questions in it, are just bad. They're off point. They show that the so-called elites of the party are disconnected from the American people. And that's not going to win them any favors with the population. The populace hates the way that the party has been interacting. They hate the way that the party has been lying to them. And can you blame them? When you look at the current state of the country, the state of affairs in the United States of America, one cannot possibly say that the country is headed in the right direction. At least no intellectually genuine person could say that. I'm sure that an intellectually disingenuous charlatan like Barack Hussein Obama could say it that way, and perhaps a charlatan like Donaldus Caesar Trumpus could say it. But that would also depend on the way that the wind was blowing that day. The nuclear follicles have to be kept cool before going to critical mass and melting down in a sea of dandruff, drowning out the sun for all and plunging life into complete and total extinction. That, of course, is another thing you won't hear from the mainstream media or even Breitbart media, but that's beside the point. The thing with the GOP, the gutless opposition party, the detente wing thereof, is that these questions only serve to hurt their credibility. Like a microcosm of the nation at large, the GOP is in the midst of an identity crisis. They have bought into the open borders hysteria of needing to change with the demographics. It's all a bunch of hocus pocus. We've seen the bread and circuses for years. Consequently, I say it's time to stand up for our country. Heaven knows our political leaders aren't doing so. That is with the exception of one. Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz. He has remained a stalwart and staunch defender of our shared Constitution. And as I have said on previous episodes, and indeed as my first officer Jeremy Grapenton and our first Air Marshal Nelson Ward have repeated time and again, the Constitution is the only litmus test that matters. Because, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of that sacred document, the Constitution itself is the supreme law of the land. But, again, most of the political class simply doesn't care. They see an opportunity to carve out a cushy niche for themselves, to get a pension that's greater than anyone in the private sector could ever get. So, while the GOP is in the midst of this identity crisis, we see that the political leaders are marching in lockstep with the message peddled by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. You know, folks, we've given Marco quite a few names here at the Wright Flyer. It's sort of difficult not to give him so many names. I guess it would be fair to say that we have given him a name for each major policy position on which he's flipped. Rubster has brought this all upon himself. He couldn't stop, or rather, he could stop all of this if he'd be honest and consistent. But we know that that's simply just not in the tea leaves for the Florida Republican senator. He goes against his grain here, and it goes to show that he is the polar opposite of what he claims to be. You see, folks, this is the inescapable reality that haunts Marxist Rubio. He's been a darling of the conservative movement, and then he's lost that crown when his true, ultimate character begins to shine through. We have to be consistent with who we choose. Now, as I've said time and again, I'm not going to tell you how to vote. It is not my place nor my desire to tell you how to exercise your fundamental and unalienable right. That said, I do want to keep you informed about those who are absolutely wolves in sheep's clothing. I fear that a vote for anyone other than Ted Cruz would be a vote for Fabian socialism. We have to return to our roots in the Constitution. And as for me, the only candidate that espouses that and who has been consistent with respect to that position is none other than Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz. Yet the Cruz derangement syndrome continues to be lobbed against him by Marxist Rube EIEIO and his friend Donaldus Caesar Trumpus. They have engaged in this sort of petty food fight against Cruz because they realize that Cruz is a solid threat to them. Cruz represents that sort of constitutionalist that we haven't really seen since the days of Calvin Coolidge. Stay cool with Coolidge was a great message back in the 20s. Stay constitutional with Cruz is a great rally cry for 2016. The 21st century has seen the country depart from the Constitution at an alarming rate. And that has led to the sorts of calamities and chaos that is just running rampant through this country. The corruption that is at the heart of the government right now swirls around this departure from our sacred social compact. It is an undeniable fact that grips the hearts and minds of those in Washington, D.C. But is it too late? I believe that the answer to that question is no. We are at the watershed point. That means we are nearly to the point of no return. This election will be the crucial determination as to whether we will return to the Constitution or whether we will double down on the failed policies of the Fabian socialists. Barack Hussein Obama is frothing at the mouth to continue his type of ideology, and therefore he loves the type of divisive politics that are playing out in the Republican presidential race. He's hoping that a weak candidate like Donald J. Trump can actually get the nomination, because his negatives are so high that he does not stand a chance of winning the general election. He performs poorly even against Hillary Rotten Clinton. And if Bernie Sanders gets it, the reality distortion field of an unkempt old socialist will absolutely outdo the reality distortion field of a closeted utopian Fabian socialist. Remember, Donald J. Trump is consistently inconsistent. His positions have waffled all over the place. He's been for universal health care. He's come out against the Second Amendment, but now he fully supports it. Isn't it funny that he suddenly starts to support it when he's vying for the candidacy of the gutless opposition party? And yet the Trumpster divers gobble it up as if it is the last morsel they'll ever eat. It just goes back to that image of Donald being the Pied Piper of disillusioned conservatives. He's got the loudmouth Sarah Palin championing him now. and he thinks that he can vie for credibility with that. But folks, I think the veneer is cracked. I think the sunlight is shining through, bringing to light the ugly, monstrous characteristics of the New York billionaire, real estate tycoon, and businessman. His consistent inconsistency is something that will be a bit of an Achilles heel for him. And I think that the arrows have been drawn and that blood has been spilled. He is losing steam and momentum. Let's hope that this means that we can all coalesce behind a true, committed constitutionalist who is absolutely devoted to returning this country to the proper scope and application of government as outlined, defined, and mandated by the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. It's as I've said from the very first episode, ladies and gentlemen, words and elections have meanings. Semantics are being used to obfuscate the truth, and we are facing a true identity crisis in this country. And make no mistake about it, this is what Zygmunt Dobbs warned us about in his magnus opus of Keynes at Harvard back in the 1950s. He wanted Americans to be resolute, to understand the grave danger that their country faces. It is time that we stop turning a deaf ear to the warnings that were professed by that great visionary half a century ago. If we wish to save this country, it is absolutely going to fall squarely upon our capable shoulders. But you know what, folks? I have absolute faith in the American people that we can bring this country back from the brink of destruction and ruination. But it will take a concerted, consistent effort on our part. And that means that we must select a consistent conservative who adheres to the principles of the Constitution. Because without the Constitution, the United States of America simply ceases to exist. All of our fundamental and unalienable rights are put at the utmost jeopardy, and we face tyranny and corruption, the likes of which the United States has never known before. We absolutely cannot allow our nation to fall back on its laurels, to fall into the poison honey trap of Fabian socialism. Because when you actually stop and think about what it is that the Fabians are trying to accomplish, all you have to do is look back to their classical iconography, going back to the 19th century when the original Fabian Society in Great Britain was attempting to coin a picture for themselves. It was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Well, that's what we see with Donald J. Trump. And I think that's also what we see with Marxist Rube EIEIO. He professes to be something which he is not in order to dupe the people, in order to pull the wool over their eyes and to put forth a feckless platform that is guaranteed to lead to defeat. Look how well Mitt Romney performed in 2012. It was an abysmal disaster. Look at how well John McCain performed in 2008 against Barack Hussein Obama in that pivotal election. It, too, was an abysmal disaster. When are we going to learn that when we place up these detente members of the gutless opposition party, it spells defeat for us in national elections each and every time? The Karl Rove types are going to be sitting in the back of their smoke-filled rooms twitting away at an abacus, trying to figure out how to skew the numbers to make it appear as though they have not been as disastrous as they really have. Of course, the American people are on to them. We fully understand what their game is, and we've had it. There's no other way to describe it. What they have done to this country is they have destroyed the credibility of the party that once stood for the Constitution. We need to get back to the Constitution, folks. That is the key. The Constitution is and always will be the key to maintaining this country's prosperity. Any and all of the other symptoms that afflict this country, whether it be the teetering economy, whether it be the rampant corruption that inflicts the halls of government, whether it be the disparate bargaining position between the several states and the federal government. It all connects back to this departure from our shared Constitution. And that is a real danger. It is a danger that we must avoid at all costs because our country is that valuable. Our country is that important. We are endowed with certain fundamental and unalienable rights by our Creator, and those rights are protected by the Constitution. But in order for the Constitution to provide us any protection, we must take a very proactive role in protecting the Constitution from those who would do everything within their power to tear it apart. That is the stark reality that we all face here in the United States presently. But most of the candidates that are vying for the highest office in the land, that of President of the United States of America, won't tell you this. They won't say that the Constitution is the cornerstone of American polity. Yet there is but one diamond in the rough that is actually standing out and standing up and proclaiming exactly what this country needs in order to get itself back onto its feet. And that candidate is none other than Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz. Now, Marxist Rube EIEIO is going to try to say that Cruz has been inconsistent. But you know, Marxist Rubio can't be consistent. First, it was, of the names we gave him, dubious Marxist. Like the failed Soviet Union, dubious Marxist Rubio wants to spy on our every communication. Apparently, the Fourth Amendment has little to no meaning for him. You could say that's consistent with his mentor, El Jefe Bush's position as well. Remember when Bush actually had the gall to stand before the cameras of the salivating media and to tell all of those graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism that no one's civil liberties were being violated by the NSA snooping program? Does he really think we're that stupid, or is he that stupid? I have a feeling it's more of the latter rather than the former. But El Jefe is not performing well in the polls. He has not performed well in the caucus state of Iowa, nor has he performed well in the first primary state of New Hampshire. Now he's got to bank everything on the Palmetto state of South Carolina. Well, that decision is fast approaching, and we'll see whether the tides of political change work for him or against him. I'm not sensing a change in tide. I am sensing a resurgent, resplendent candidacy for Ted Cruz, and that is exactly the candidate that America needs right now. So, Marxist Rubio then got the name of Marxist Rube. This name ties into his approach on the Gang of Eight bill. Marxist Rube thinks that he can smooth that one over with the electorate. He's praying that our attention spans are as short as Donaldus Caesar Trumpus's. But we all know better. So he tries to deflect, claiming that Cruz's poison pill amendment and rider to the Gang of Eight bill showed tacit support. Come on, Marxy, just admit that you don't support the notion of popular sovereignty, that you absolutely believe that handing this country over to the torrent of illegal aliens flooding through our porous southern border fits your national policy? Because that is what you are doing. You are trying to cover your tracks. It's just not working very well for you at all. After he got the name Marxist Rube, it became Marxist Rube-IEIO. I attach this one to him for his disingenuous attack on Cruz's tax plan. It's not a VAT or value-added tax, Rube EIEIO. It's a flat tax. It really would cut down on the insane tax code and end the dubious progressive tax system that has plagued this country since 1913. Again, I know you want to try and claim that that Cruz's plan here is somehow European in nature, but your desire of wanting to keep an income tax in place is more in line with that of Europe than with the values held by the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country, we the people. Just let it go, Marxist rube, E-I-E-I-O. It's not helping you. You're not winning any favors. You're not going to convince a vast majority of the fed-up base of the gutless opposition party that you truly espouse their values. They see the true condition of this country, and they've had it. Politicians like you have led this country astray for far too long now, and it is time to return sanity to the country. That means returning the reins of political power to a true, constitutional, consistent conservative like Ted Cruz. You know, Rubio, you have been completely inconsistent. The only candidate up there, and you must see him as a godsend, that makes you seem consistent is none other than Donaldus Caesar Trumpus. But I wouldn't rest my laurel wreaths on that. I wouldn't place that as a sign of good things with respect to my candidacy or with respect to my chances to win. That just shows how feckless you truly are. And with all of that corrupt baggage following you from the state of Florida, the great sunshine state of Florida, you are just out of your mind to think that will fly over well with most of the American people. I can guarantee you that it won't. The American people see you as the corrupt little politician that you actually are. And I think it's time for you to give this up. The jig is playing and the fat lady has sung. Your campaign is done. Stick a fork in it and get it over with. Now, there's yet another name that we can give to the Rubester. I think we can now call him Narco Rube, E-I-E-I-O. Given his family's history with the narcotics trade, Narco has gone out of his way to hide these ties, along with the rest of his seedy deals. Yet, the American people are onto him. This sort of track record is not something one can just sweep under the proverbial rug. Nevertheless, Narco believes we're too stupid to spot it. The 2016 election has produced a triad of tarnish. Three particular candidates in the race constitute some of the most corrupt, waffling, and incomprehensible candidates in America's electoral history. Only one of the three will have the backing of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. Her husband started their association with all things corrupt when he entered into Arkansas politics decades ago. Now his disgraced wife, after the Lewinsky scandal, wants to pick up where he left off. Hillary Clinton is as corrupt as they come. She's trying to figure out whether the cookies on her illicit private email server are the same type that she would have baked during the height of the Lewinsky scandal. Of course, she knows better than that, but she wants to pull an Obama and claim she didn't know about it. Then she claimed her server never contained classified information. Now Emailgate is following her like the executioner followed Henry VIII's many wives. Donaldus Caesar Trumpus seems like a modern-day Caligula. To his followers, he represents the promise of a bright future. In reality, he makes odd statements about dating his daughter if she weren't really his daughter. I think Donaldus's desire for a rotating platform might speak well to him. That way he can change his positions on a whim, but claim it's just the price of business. Then there's little Narco Rube, E-I-E-I-O. He attempts to pull off the image of the boy next door, or Jose Sixpack to steal Kevin Silverstein's name, when nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, he has little connection to the truth. Like Hillary, he's turned lying into an art form. When he says she's the candidate of the past, what he really means is that he's a younger version of Hillary's style of politician. Narco is a man whose past is just like Richard Nixon snorting coke off a clandestine tape deck in June. He has the gall to claim that he's a consistent conservative. I suppose that's true if he's comparing his positions to Donaldus Caesar Trumpus, but that's not a good comparison. It just proves he would be a pandering sellout as a president. If there's one thing he's consistent on, it's pandering for corruption. Have you ever noticed that, folks, there's this pattern? Other than Donaldus, Narco is the loudest when screaming about Cruz. He attempts to project his own shortcomings onto the Texas Republican senator. It's really not becoming of him. Yet that's par for the course when it comes to politics. It always seems to be the liars who point the finger first. With Hillary, it was the vast right-wing conspiracy. Apparently, constitutionalists have been conspiring against her for her entire life. What it really boils down to is that she's employing Saul Alinsky-style rules for radical attacks against her opponents. That playbook, however, is starting to get worn. The leaves are falling out from the spine. Liars like Hillary and Narco scream in the shrillest tones. They can feel the presence of prying eyes. The people gaze upon them, dissecting their litany of untruths. With every challenge to their credibility, they grow more defiant. Perhaps they've lost the truth in their web of deceit. I think this is because they don't want people to know their true character. That would be devastating to their fragile egos. In that sense, they're narcissists. They have to create their own reality. Thus, lying becomes second nature to them. Just look at Donald J. Trump. It's second nature to him, and he's the largest narcissist on the stage. Or perhaps it's that they don't have a true character. I suppose this one could work either way with them. Their persona couldn't handle the truth, so they make up their own fairy tale. It's like Disneyland, but for adults. Is that what we want to put at the helm of this great republic? I think we have suffered through enough of this over the entire 2 terms of Barack Hussein Obama. Since he first assumed the office of president, Obama has been willing to lie, cheat, and steal to promote his goal. There can be no question that his goal has always been the utter annihilation of the United States. Yet, Narco Rubio has similar character traits. He espouses the same empty platitude of hopey-changey. Lie after lie has been peddled from the White House. Press Secretary Josh Earnest seems to be aptly named. He grins like the Cheshire Cat while peddling Obama's illogical ideological filth. I think the American people are sick of it all. And who can blame them? The media refuses to connect the dots. They love the sort of dissension that currently grips the country. Like Obama, they feel that the United States is the principal cause of evil in the world. So they peddle propaganda and lie about their objectivity. The whole thing is a farce. Meanwhile, the popular sovereigns see their country crumbling before their very eyes. The gutless opposition party makes vociferous vows to put an end to Obama's unconstitutional assaults. But in the end, they're a toothless paper tiger. All growl and no bite. None of them seem to understand the outrage they are unleashing among the people. It's sheer madness. Liars are exalted, and purveyors of truth are labeled as quacks and kooks. One would not be wrong in comparing this to an Orwellian novel. Big Brother is out there, but he's a few prizes short of a Happy Meal. Once again, sanity can only be restored by the diligent and incessant efforts of the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country, we the people. Then comes the story of Marxist Rube EIEIO's latest endorsement. It comes from the Palmetto State of South Carolina's Governor Nikki Haley. She has come out and said that she supports Rubio because he can unite the party. Yet she said in months past that she was made uncomfortable by his support of amnesty. And she said that he could not escape his support for amnesty. But then again, Nikki Haley has a bit of an inconsistent past as well. She is firmly entrenched in the détente wing of the gutless opposition party, but she has really damaged her own reputation with supposedly being a chief warrior against the cancerous and poisonous doctrine of political correctness. Yet when that tragic and senseless shooting occurred at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, back in June of 2015, she was one of the first to claim that the Southern Cross battle flag must come down from a Confederate memorial. She was the one that started the pandering and caving that we witnessed during the summer's assault on the First Amendment. Folks, we must see these people for who they really are, because they are out to pull the wool over your eyes. They are out to peddle a socialist-style message that has no place in a free, open, and honest society like that of the United States of America. We must be steadfast in our support for the Constitution. And as I've said, Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz is the only candidate currently vying for the office of President of the United States who personifies and truly exemplifies the sort of policies that could begin to return this nation to a modicum of sanity. But we see that the Cruz derangement syndrome has gripped so many of his opponents, and that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are going to double down on their efforts to tear Cruz apart. They fear exactly what he is capable of achieving. His track record speaks for itself, and unlike that of Narco Rubio, it is not a track record of corruption, deceit, lies, and inconsistency. The realm of inconsistency falls completely on the shoulders and in the laps of Donaldus Caesar Trumpus and Narco Rubio. You know, maybe that is the ticket from hell. Rubio and Donaldus. If it's Donaldus as president and Rubio as vice president, it says we're sure to cover everybody because we're going to waffle so much that nobody is going to be able to figure out what our true positions are, because let's face it, folks, they don't hold any true positions. That is the stark reality that we are facing in the United States of America right now. And again, folks, it's why Jeremy and I both say that it is of the utmost importance and that it is absolutely paramount and crucial that you form and maintain a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution, and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights. Then and only then will you be able to see through the web of deceit that has been thrown out by wicked little politicians like Narco Rubio, and like the charlatans and frauds such as Donaldus Caesar Trumpus. We can never forget that their waffling would mean that they would waffle on the most important issues, those of our fundamental and unalienable rights. And that is something that we in the United States of America can ill afford at this time. We must remain as stalwart defenders of our shared Constitution, because that is the only thing, the only thread in the fiber that is keeping us from plunging into the depths of despair of a tyrannical, oppressive, despotic regime. We've already seen what a narcissist can do. We've already seen the destructive prowess of someone who waffles. We've seen that for the past 7 years at least under the Barack Hussein Obama regime. It's time for some fresh blood, and it's time for a breath of fresh air in America. And the way that we get that breath of fresh air in this great representative republic of ours is to return to strict adherence at all levels of government to our Constitution. Remember, folks, that the Constitution absolutely belongs to each and every one of us. It does not belong to the various politicians vying for the highest office in the land. It does not belong to their special interest groups or their political action committees or PACs. It belongs to we, the people. And that is a grave responsibility for we, the popular sovereigns, the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country, to bear. But we can bear it, because we have overcome every adversity that we have ever encountered in this country's short yet illustrious history, and we can secure a great future for this country. But we must coalesce behind a candidate who truly represents the true values of the United States of America, and that is Ted Cruz. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, as always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, I also invite you to leave comments, questions, concerns, either here on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page, or you can follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle of @RadioAviationX. Again, folks, that is @RadioAviationEX. And remember, it's all one word. Once again, hope to see you the next time that Jeremy and I fly over the friendly airwaves, leaving you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, as no other radio program or venue can, quite like we can. And I bid you farewell. Do take care. See you next time, folks.